The first time I saw the new locks on my front door, I thought I had the wrong house. I stood on the porch with a discharge bracelet still on my wrist, one hand clutching the small bag the hospital gave me, the other holding a paper cup of cold coffee I had not even finished. My legs were weak. My back still ached from the bed I had been trapped in for 3 nights, and all I wanted was my own couch, my own blanket, and the smell of my own kitchen. But the lock was wrong. Shiny. New. The deadbolt I had chosen with my late husband was gone. I tried my key anyway. It slid in halfway and stopped. I stared at the door, then at the porch, then at the little flower pot by the step where my son used to hide his spare key when he was a teenager. That pot was empty now. I knocked. Once, twice. No answer. Then I heard a sound from inside. A television. And laughter. Not just any laughter. My son's laugh. My stomach turned. I knocked again, harder this time. "Evan, open the door!" The laughter stopped. Footsteps crossed the hallway. A shadow appeared behind the frosted glass. Then Evan opened the door just a crack, enough for me to see his face. He looked annoyed, not surprised, not worried. Annoyed, like I had interrupted something important. "Mom," he said flatly, "you should have called." I looked past him and saw my daughter-in-law, Brooke, standing in my living room in slippers, holding a glass of wine like she had every right in the world to be there. I remember blinking several times because my mind refused to catch up with what my eyes were telling me. "What is going on?" I asked. Evan folded his arms. "We changed the locks." The words landed like a slap. "You did what?" "Mom, it's temporary," he said, though his tone said the opposite. "You've been in the hospital. We needed to make sure the house was secure." Secure. My house. The house my husband and I built over 28 years. The house where I raised Evan after his father died. The house where I paid every bill, every repair, every tax notice, every mortgage payment until the mortgage was gone. The house where I had planned to grow old in peace. And my son was standing in the doorway telling me it was temporary. I looked at Brooke. She did not even bother pretending to be kind. "You look tired," she said. "Maybe this is not the best time for a big conversation." I let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "A big conversation? I just came home from the hospital and I can't even get into my own house." Evan stepped outside and closed the door behind him, as if that made him the one in charge of the moment. "Mom, don't do this in front of the neighbors." That was the first time I understood this was not confusion. This was a choice. 3 days earlier, I had been admitted for chest pain that turned out to be severe dehydration and a nasty infection. Nothing life-threatening, the doctor said, but enough to scare me. I had asked Evan to check on the house while I was gone. I had asked him to feed the cat, water the porch plants, and pick up the mail. I had trusted my son, and now I was standing on my own porch with police backup because something in my gut told me I was not walking into a misunderstanding. I was walking into a setup. Let me go back. Maybe then you will understand why. When the ambulance took me to St. Mary's, I still believed my son was a good man. Evan had not always been like this. When he was young, he had a soft heart. He used to bring home stray dogs, broken bicycles, and half-finished school projects, believing he could fix everything with enough patience. After his father died, it was just the two of us in that house. I worked at the county office during the day and cleaned rooms at a motel at night for a while after the funeral. I never let him see how tired I was. I wanted him to feel safe. He grew up, went to community college, then got a job at a warehouse. I was proud of him. Too proud, maybe. When he met Brooke, I noticed right away that she had sharp eyes, the kind that measured a room before she entered it. She smiled in a way that did not reach them. Still, I tried. I cooked. I smiled. I gave them the upstairs bedroom when they got engaged and said they needed a place to save money before buying their own home. That was 6 years ago. They never left. At first, it was small things. Brooke suggesting we needed to update the house. Brooke asking why I still kept old furniture. Brooke saying the neighborhood had changed, and maybe it was smarter for the house to be put in Evan's name someday, for security. I laughed then, because I thought she was being practical in a clumsy way. I was wrong. The first real crack came last winter. I found bank notices on the table with my name on them, and a new signature line below mine I had never signed. A refinance application. A home equity loan. For a moment, I could not breathe. I took the papers straight to Evan. He said there had been a mix-up. Brooke said I was overreacting. They said the bank needed forms for family financial planning. Evan even told me I was too emotional because I had been under stress. I backed off, because that is what mothers do. We protect the peace, even when peace is not protecting us. Then came the hospital. While I was there, I called Evan twice a day. He sounded distracted but reassuring. Said the cat was fine. Said the mail was on the counter. Said not to worry. What he did not say was that he had changed the locks, moved my spare set of house keys, and, according to the neighbor later, had a contractor truck parked in my driveway the day after I left. When I finally got the police involved, it was because I stood on that porch for 30 minutes while Evan and Brooke argued with me through the door like I was a stranger asking to come in from the rain. Officer Ramirez and Officer Neal were kind, but even they could see the problem. The second they looked at my ID and the deed copy I had brought in my purse. The house was in my name. My name alone. Officer Ramirez asked Evan to step outside. Evan crossed his arms and said he had every right to be there because he lived there too. Then he said something I will never forget. This place is basically mine anyway. The officer looked at him. Ma'am, are you saying you own the property? Evan nodded toward me like I was a child being difficult. My mom is not thinking clearly because she's sick. We've been handling everything. Handling everything. That phrase made something cold settle in my chest. Brooke came to the doorway after that, all calm confidence, and said, Mrs. Hayes gets confused when she's upset. We've been trying to help her. Confused. I was so angry I could hardly see straight. I pulled out my envelope of papers with shaking hands and handed them to Officer Ramirez. The deed, the tax receipts, the utility bills, the hospital discharge sheet that still smelled faintly of antiseptic. Then I handed him the letter from my attorney, the one I had nearly ignored because I was too tired to deal with it before I went into the hospital. My attorney, bless him, had called me 2 weeks earlier after a title alert I had set up years ago finally flagged a change attempt on my property. At the time, I had thought it was some routine warning. It was not. Someone had submitted paperwork trying to place my house into a family trust I had never authorized, then tried to withdraw money against it. When my attorney discovered the signature page, he told me something else. The notary stamp used on the form came from a mobile service that had been booked to my address on a day I was out of town. Only I had not been out of town. I had been at church helping set up for the spring fundraiser. My pastor and 3 volunteers had seen me there. That was when I realized the papers had been forged. And I knew, with a terrible heaviness, exactly who had to have done it. Officer Ramirez scanned the documents, then looked at me again. Ma'am, these are serious allegations. I know, I said. That is why I called you. Evan's face changed for the first time. Not guilt, fear. Mom, he said, lowering his voice. We can talk inside. No, I said. Brooke's lips tightened. This is humiliating. You humiliated me first, I said. The officers separated us. One of them asked Evan to produce identification and any proof that he had legal authority to lock me out. He could not. He kept talking, saying the house was old, saying I had promised things, saying he had spent money on repairs. That was when my attorney arrived. Yes, arrived, because I had called him from the hospital parking lot before I ever came home. I had told him something in my gut felt wrong. He had been waiting nearby with copies of the title report, the forged application, and a motion already drafted to freeze any further changes. The look on Evan's face when he saw Mr. Calder walking up my driveway was the look of a man who had run out of excuses. My attorney did not yell. He did not need to. He handed Officer Ramirez the fraud packet and asked Evan one simple question. Did you sign the refinance papers in your mother's name? Brooke stepped in fast. Too fast. She was going to help us anyway. she snapped. "We were going to be a family business. We were going to turn this place into a rental and invest in a better home." A better home. My house, to them, was just a stepping stone. Evan turned toward her as if he had never heard her say it out loud. Maybe he had not. Maybe he had spent so long pretending he was in control that he had not realized she was the one steering him over the cliff. Officer Neal asked them both to keep their hands visible. That is when Brooke started crying. Not real crying. The dry, angry kind. She said I had always been impossible. She said I had made Evan feel guilty for wanting more. That was the second twist. Because I had never wanted more for him than I already gave him. It was Evan who had wanted more of me. More money. More space. More control. And Brooke wanted him to take it. When the officers asked to look at the hallway camera I had installed years before, after a string of package thefts in the neighborhood, Brooke went white. I had almost forgotten that camera existed. The police took the footage to the cruiser and watched it on a tablet while I sat on the porch holding my hospital bag like it was the only solid thing in the world. There it was. Brooke and Evan, 3 nights earlier, moving my documents from the locked desk in my bedroom. There it was again. Brooke on the phone saying, "Once she's in the hospital, we do it." And there, clear as daylight, was Evan opening the door to the mobile notary while I was at church, not at home. I had not seen his face in that moment, but I recognized the voice on the recording. My son. The officers came back with new expressions. The situation had changed. That was when Evan finally cracked. He sat down on the porch step like his knees had given out. He rubbed both hands over his face and said, "I was going to fix it." I stared at him. "Fix what?" He looked up, eyes red and ashamed. "The debts." Brooke snapped her head toward him. "Evan, don't..." But he was already talking. The truth came out in ugly pieces. Credit cards. Business loans. A failed side venture. A truck payment. A line of debt he had hidden because he did not want me to know he had been borrowing against my address. Brooke had convinced him the house could cover it for a little while. Just until they got ahead. Just until they sold the property. Just until I stopped being a problem. I listened to my son confess that he had lied to me for months, maybe years, and I felt something inside me break so cleanly that there was almost no sound to it. Not because he owed money, because he thought I was the safest thing in his life to steal from. That was the deepest wound. I had paid for his braces, his first truck, his wedding catering, Brooke's emergency dental work. I had given them the downstairs room, the basement freezer, the holiday bonus I received from my job, and more help than I ever admitted to anyone. And when he got desperate, he did not come to me. He tried to erase me. The officers asked them to leave the property while the fraud matter was reviewed. Brooke immediately began saying this was a misunderstanding and that she had nowhere else to go. Evan stood there staring at the floor like a boy waiting to be scolded by a teacher. That would have been easier. I could have scolded him. I could have yelled. I could have cried. Instead, I said, "You broke into my life," and called it help. He flinched as if I had struck him. I wish I could tell you that was the end. It was not. A week later, the bank confirmed that a home equity line had been attempted under forged authorization. The title company flagged the notary irregularities. The mobile notary admitted he had been paid to witness signatures without checking IDs properly. The police filed the report. The county investigator started asking questions. Brooke's name showed up in the email trail. Evan's debit card paid the notary fee. He'd opened the door to the whole mess, and now there was no closing it again. Brooke moved out first. She left in a hurry, taking what she claimed was hers, which turned out to be most of the dishes and a coffee maker she had bought with a gift card I gave her for Christmas. She told Evan he had ruined her future. He did not argue. 2 days later, he came to my front step with a grocery bag and eyes that would not meet mine. He asked if he could come in. For a long time, I said nothing. The porch light was on. The old lock was back on the door, thanks to Officer Neal and a locksmith the police recommended. Inside, the house smelled like lemon cleaner and the tea I had brewed earlier. It was my home again, but the peace had changed. Nothing stays the same after betrayal. It just learns how to stand up straighter. "I don't know how to do this," he whispered. I almost said, You should have thought of that before you tried to take my house. Instead, I asked, did you ever plan to tell me the truth? He started crying then. Real crying this time. The hard kind. He admitted he'd been ashamed. He admitted Brooke kept pushing. He admitted he had wanted the house money because he felt like a failure and did not know how to look me in the eye anymore. That was the part that hurt the most, not because it excused anything it did not, but because I could hear the little boy he used to be inside the broken man in front of me. And I hated how much of me still loved that boy. I told him he would not live here anymore. He nodded. I told him he would repay every cent, through the courts if necessary. He nodded again. I told him I was pressing charges for the forged documents. This time, he broke completely. I did not comfort him. Love is not the same as rescue. The investigation dragged on for months. Brooke's lawyer tried to claim she had been managing family finances, but the forged paperwork, the camera footage, and the bank records made that lie collapse fast. Evan took a plea on the lesser count after admitting he signed documents he knew were false. He had to repay the attempted loan costs, submit to probation, and do community service. Brooke, with her sharper instincts, tried to avoid the worst of it. But when her role became clear, the consequences followed her too. Not dramatic, not movie-like, just real, heavy, slow, hard to escape. And me? I kept the house. I got my account limits restored. I changed every password. I installed new security lights. I replaced the kitchen lockbox where I had kept my old deed copies. I planted flowers in the front bed in the spring, even though my hands still shook sometimes when I turned the soil. As for Evan, I did not cut him off completely. That surprised some people. It surprised me too. I told him he could earn back contact, but not trust, not quickly. Maybe not ever. He had to prove over time that he was capable of being a son and not just a man looking for something to take. He showed up to therapy. He showed up to repayment meetings. He showed up to the church pantry where I volunteered every Thursday, where he stacked canned goods beside me in silence for weeks before he finally said, "I'm sorry." I looked at him and said, "I know." And I did know. I knew he was sorry, the way a man is sorry after the house is already burned down. I knew that regret does not rebuild what greed destroys. But I also knew that if I spent the rest of my life turning that pain into poison, then he would not be the only one paying for what happened. So I chose something harder than revenge. I chose boundaries. I chose my own name on every document. I chose to sleep in my house without fear. I chose to stop apologizing for wanting what was mine. People ask me now whether I hate my son. I tell them no. Hatred would mean he still owns a piece of me. He does not. The police came to my house that day because I asked them to, and they did their job. The courts did theirs. Brooke learned that taking from a woman who has survived enough to know the difference between love and leverage is a very expensive mistake. Evan learned that a mother's forgiveness is not the same thing as a blank check. And I learned something too. Sometimes the person who changes the locks thinks they are keeping you out. Sometimes they are locking themselves in with the very consequences they created. The house is quiet now. Too quiet some evenings. But it is mine. Every creak in the floorboards belongs to me again. Every lamp, every picture on the wall, every old scar in the kitchen counter. My life did not become easy after that day. It became honest. And honesty, after betrayal, feels a lot like peace. Not the kind you are given. The kind you fight for, one locked door at a time.